Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Blade Runner 4, I and Talon, by K.W. Jeter. The final chapter, Chapter 16. "The eyes," said the old man. He didn't look down at the sleeping figure in the glass-lidded coffin. "That's the secret." The row of Eldon Tyrell duplicates dreamed whatever slow dreams they might, without benefit of eyes to see them. "From the beginning, that was the secret. That was what you needed to know." Iris dosed her own eyes and stepped backward, away from the coffin between her and Karsten. "I don't want to hear any more." She held up her free hand, palm outward, as though to fend off both him and the hollow-eyed figure in the coffin. "I've heard enough." "No, you haven't." Karsten's voice was cruelly blunt. "You have to hear it all, every bit of it. You don't have any choice about that." "Why?" She looked at him now. The fear that had sent her heart pounding, trying to force her cold, thickened blood through her veins, had been evoked by the Tyrell figures' empty eye sockets. She had no idea where, from what part inside herself, that flinching terror had come. "Why me?" "You'll find that out as well, soon enough." "Really? You'll tell me?" The hope in her voice shamed her. Iris felt something colder than before on her face, stinging sharper than the ice crystals that had drifted down from the chamber's ceiling. She touched her face with trembling fingertips and found frightened tears already at the point of freezing. With the back of her hand, she wiped them away. "Don't screw around with me anymore," she pleaded. "I can't take it." "Just listen then." Karsten lowered his voice, knowing she would still be able to hear every word. "Here's the deal. This is how it works. The eyes are how the transfer of information is made. It's an optical process. The windows of the soul, right? When those windows are thrown wide, things can enter as well as exit. That's how the chain is forged, link by link, as it were. And it's different from the download process used in the manufacture of ordinary replicants. The ones with fictional biographies and memories instead of real ones. Those false memories are loaded in during the actual cellular construction of their brains, on top of the base material transcribed from the minds and memories of the human templants, upon which they're based. But what's loaded through the eyes is the new material that the original human or the most recent replicant duplicate has experienced, and that has become part of the human's mind and memories in whatever interval of time since the base gestalt forming material was laid down. Plus, and this was the breakthrough Eldon Tyrell achieved since the original replicant technology was stolen and handed over to him, a counter-entropic signal based upon wave cancellation theory ensuring that with each new subsequent transfer of information, data errors from previous transfers are identified and eliminated. Essentially, instead of a cascading pileup of data errors eventually resulting in paralysis or idiocy, the transcribed information is constantly renewed to a pristine state. And the result of that is true immortality. An unbroken chain. If everything had gone according to his plans, Eldon Tyrell would have lived forever. If you say so, murmured Iris. The words had come streaming past her, with only a few catching in her thoughts, like scraps of paper written upon in an incomprehensible language, swirling in the gutter of an LA street. If he'd wanted to. There's no doubt about that. Eldon Tyrell wanted everything. That was the problem. And to never let go of it. That was why even his associates, such as the officials of the UN immigration program, turned on him at last. They had to. That much greed and hunger couldn't be trusted, even by those who were nearly as greedy and hungry. It's one thing to want, as the batty replicant did, more than a meager 4 years of life. It's another to want eternity. He didn't get it, though. No, said Karsten. He didn't. No one does. At least, not yet. I don't get it either, said Iris. She brushed the last of the ice crystals from her face and looked direct at the old man. If the eyes are the important things, then that must have been why Tyrell had somebody else working on them outside the Tyrell Corporation, right? Then why the mysteries beyond that? What was all that for? Mysteries? Karsten appeared amused. He raised one white eyebrow. I'm not saying there aren't any. In fact, there are plenty. But which ones in particular are you referring to? Come on. I said it before. Don't screw around with me. The owl, she said bluntly. What was the whole business with the owl? Why send me? Why send anybody off on some hunt for it? What has a stupid bird to do with Eldon Tyrell's eyes? Everything, replied Karsten. Do you really imagine that someone like Eldon Tyrell would keep an animal of any sort, a mere living thing around for no reason? He was hardly the sentimental type. And if there were any sort of genuine test of empathic capability, if a void conf machine could be made to work and discern whether someone was human or not, the chances of his passing the test would have been slight indeed. So if the owl was there in his personal quarters in the Tyrell Corporation building, there was some purpose for it. And the owl's purpose was that it was Eldon Tyrell's backup survival system. Say again? It's simple enough. Karsten gestured toward the figure sleeping in the glass-lidded coffin. Tyrell was realistic enough to know that he had enemies. He knew something might happen to him that would prevent the transfer, the throwing of the switch, as you put it, between him and the next intended link in the chain. Given the situation, he would have been a fool not to have created some kind of a backup, a way of somehow increasing his chances, giving himself at least a shot at survival in case the worst came to happen. And that's why the Tyrell Corporation's owl, so amusingly named Scrappy, was, or perhaps is, or perhaps is, given that the creature might still exist, alive somewhere in the city. We don't know who took the owl from you, or what that person might have done with it, or even why anyone else might have wanted it. It's useless without one of the replicants you see here. After a new set of artificial eyes are surgically grafted in, because all that scrappy the owl contains, encrypted into its limited cortical matter, is a minimal set of Eldon Tyrell's basic mind and memories. A highly compressed version, with some considerable amounts of data eliminated, of the gestalt-forming mental contents that would have been transferred optically from him to the next waiting replicant in the sequential chain if the batty replicant hadn't gotten to Tyrell first. I don't get it. The tips of her fingers felt like icicles as Iris rubbed her aching brow. Why put something like that inside an owl? What was the point of it? The owl served Tyrell's purposes admirably. It is, in fact, the perfect medium for the transcription of the minimal set, the essential backup of Tyrell's mind and memories. As a predator, it has a complex enough neurocortical system for there to be excess circuit space for that set. Even if, as I said, some material had to be discarded. If the minimal set were used to animate one of the waiting Tyrell replicants, there would be undoubted gaps in Tyrell's memory, but the essence, the gestalt of the man would be there, as well as his most recent memories. Tyrell was apparently in the habit of updating the contents the owl carried on a weekly basis. That's why he kept the owl so close to him in his personal quarters, feeding and taking care of it on his own. In effect, he was merely taking care of an exteriorized part of himself, and not another creature at all. That would have required the exercise of some empathic function on his part, a function he lacked. And of course, there were other physiological reasons why the owl was used, other than the now extinct primate species. The owl is one of the few creatures with true binocular vision. Both its eyes look straight forward, as do those of a human being. The optical-based transfer of information is impossible to perform otherwise. Then there are reasons beyond that, beside the convenience of the owl being a relatively small and easy-to-handle animal while in captivity, given Eldon Tyrell's fussy meticulousness at doing so. There is the survival factor. With its own owl mind and instincts still operational, and the Eldon Tyrell minimum set merely carried as non-functioning neurological baggage, as it were, the owl has at least some ability to look after itself, should circumstances arise when Tyrell would no longer be able to do so. And as you found out for yourself, that turned out to be the case. The vermin-ridden back alleys of Los Angeles were a perfect hunting ground for the escaped owl, until it was captured by the people from whom you managed to take it. I didn't have it for long, murmured Iris. A memory image arose of the great winged bird of prey in her tiny apartment. Not long at all. Not your fault. Karsten's voice was tinged with pity again. You were up against forces of which you could, as yet, have little understanding. You're still up against them. There have been reasons for the things that have happened to you. Those reasons are still undisclosed to you, but they were real nevertheless, going all the way back to the beginning, and perhaps even farther than that. He watched her for any reaction. Tell me, why do you think you were chosen to go hunting for the owl? Why were you given the job? Because Iris was no longer sure, but came up with the only answer she was able to. Because they thought I could find it. Somebody thought I could. She shook her head. But I don't know who it was anymore. Maybe I never did. There's more to it than that, said Karsten. Do you want me to show you? Do I have a choice? I'll give you one. Now I will. You've come this far, but we won't go the rest of the way unless you want to. His voice had dropped almost to a whisper. I'll let you decide. I can show you, or you can walk out of here right now, out into the sunshine where it's nice and warm, and you won't have to know. Iris thought it over as much as she could. Her thoughts seemed frozen in place, as though they had become as chilled as the numb flesh of her limbs. All right, she gave a single slow nod. Go ahead. You have to come over here. Karsten reached across the coffin between them and took her free hand. He stepped around the head of the container, closer to her. This is what you've been waiting for from the beginning. He led her down the line of coffins, each with its glass lid thrown back, revealing the grimly sleeping contents within, all the way to the end of the line, close to the ice-covered wall of the chamber. The last coffin-like container was there, the one that Karsten had left unopened. The flat surface of its lid was frosted white with an accumulation of ice crystals, like a shelf of snow. Karsten let go of her hand and reached down to the latch at the side of the coffin. Once again, Iris heard the tiny, breath-like sigh of the container's pneumatic seal being breached. Karsten grasped the edge of the lid, and with greater care than he had used with the others, lifted and tilted it back. Now, tell me what you see. Karsten stepped away, letting Iris come forward reluctantly, but inevitably. This time. She stood at the side of the coffin and looked down, and saw herself. It had happened before. The memory of watching the movie and seeing the woman up on the screen, the one who had looked exactly like her, the one named Rachel, who the Blade Runner Deckard had fallen in love with. She had been able to deny it to herself then, that she had been looking at her double, the face the same as her own. Deny it until Vogel had pointed it out to her, had made her admit the truth. And fury and tears had burst forth from some unknown place inside her, for some reason she couldn't fathom. Fury at being frightened by not knowing what it meant. Tears at knowing it meant everything, even though she had yet to discover why it did. You see her, don't you? Karsten's voice came from behind Iris. It's like a mirror, isn't it? Iris had only time for one slow nod of agreement before the mirror shattered. She heard the cry from the sleeping woman, the one with her face but a different name, the one named Rachel, as if the woman were suddenly waking up from her long sleep, woken by bad dreams, bad enough to make her cry out in pain, mouth wide and back arching up from the padded, silken lining of the glass-lidded coffin. The cry broke louder, echoing from the icy walls, until it was just as suddenly silenced by the blood that welled up and filled the woman's throat and mouth. And the echo wasn't that of her silenced cry, but the ringing of the gunshot which had brought a smaller red flower blossoming at her breast, with a dark center where the bullet had smashed through the collarbone below, stopping the infinitely slow beat of her heart. The next shot from the gun in Iris's raised hand slammed the woman with her face back down into the coffin. The woman's arms flung wide, hands spread, as if she were trying to embrace a bullet big as the world. And then she was only a crumpled dead thing in the red, spattered box, the backs of her wrists against the metal of its edges. "You poor fool," said Karsten. No shock, but only sadness sounded in his voice. "That won't do any good. It won't stop anything. It's too late for that." Iris let the gun, warm enough now to thaw her frozen hand, drift downward from its own weight. She felt dizzied and unsure as she turned away from the coffin and its dead contents to look at the old man. "I don't know why I did it." "It doesn't matter." Karsten reached out and touched her shoulder with almost paternal kindness. "Not for you or her, which is the same thing, really. You know that, don't you? It's like suicide, only you're still alive afterward. You can't kill yourself that easily." Not for lack of trying, thought Iris. She wondered if she had been trying to from the beginning. The beginning before the owl. She raised the gun in her hand, its metal chilling again to the temperature of her cold flesh, and regarded it. The sound of another gunshot came, distant and muffled by the chamber's ice-laden walls. More shots, the distinct stutter of automatic rifle fire, filtered through from outside and above at the surface of the surrounding desert. Karsten turned away from her, his slight body visibly tensing into full alertness. "That's not supposed to be happening," he muttered. "What?" Iris could hear more shots, still muffled but louder and closer. "What's happening?" "Stay here," ordered Karsten. He plucked the gun out of the stiff fingers of her hand, then headed with it toward the door by which they had entered the chamber. The disembodied eyes, in their fluid-filled vessels, watched him pass without comment. Karsten, gun poised in one hand, pulled open the heavy door. Bright sunlight didn't pour in. Iris realized that she and the old man had been down there for hours, long enough for evening to have set in above, in the real world. There was enough dim light from outside to silhouette another figure in the doorway just past Karsten. "Should have let me do it," thought Iris. A measure of her former hardcore professionality returned as she saw what happened next. Karsten's reaction time was too slow. Even with the gun already raised into position, he wasn't able to get a shot off in time. A snarling flare burst from the silhouetted figure's automatic rifle, braced against his hip. The impact of the bullets was enough to lift Karsten's slight form off the floor and send him flying backward into the chamber. Before he landed, the clenching of his fist upon the gun he'd taken from Iris sent a single bullet upward. It hit one of the bare fluorescent light fixtures. With a sparking sizzle of electricity, the entire chamber was plunged into darkness. With the first shots, Iris had scrambled behind the row of suspended animation chambers. Crouching down, she watched as the figure in the chamber's doorway switched on a flashlight. Its beam swept across the space, illuminating the eyes, floating in their gelatinous liquids. Then passing on, the figure stepped over Karsten's body and walked cautiously past the lab benches. Silently, Iris crept farther behind the row of coffins, away from the armed figure's approach, until she was hidden by the first container Karsten had opened. The flashlight beam swept across the row, then settled on the coffin at the far end, the one holding her own double. With his automatic rifle slung over his shoulder, the figure held the flashlight directly above the far coffin, then leaned forward to examine the dead female replicant it held. Enough of the beam caught his own face, and Iris was able to recognize him. Meyer, she thought. My old boss. Somehow, she found herself unsurprised. It took only a few seconds' examination for Meyer to assure himself that the female replicant in the coffin was dead. Switching off the flashlight, he turned and strode toward the exit, the doorway illuminated by what was left of the fading twilight outside and above the trench in which the chamber was buried. Iris slowly crept forward so she could keep an eye on Meyer for as long as she could. She ducked behind the corner of one of the workbenches when she saw another figure outside the doorway. The second figure said something she couldn't catch, though she thought she could recognize the voice. But Meyer's words, as he was still inside the chamber, were plain enough. "Yeah, I found her." With a tilt of his head, Meyer pointed toward the unlit interior. "I worked with her long enough when she was alive. I should be able to tell." The other figure started to make some protest, but Meyer cut him off. "I don't care what happened to her, just that it did." As Iris watched, Meyer pulled the automatic rifle up into firing position, braced against his hip. "You earned your pay." Another quick burst of rifle fire sounded. Brrrr! Then Meyer stepped across the corpse sprawled outside the doorway. Iris waited until Meyer had climbed out of the trench. Then she crept forward and found her gun beside Karsten's outstretched, motionless hand. She picked the gun up in both her numb hands, holding it close against herself as she listened to the distant sound of spinners lifting from the desert surface. The vehicle's jet exhausts snarled, then faded in the night sky above. Enough stars had come out that, in their cold blue radiance, Iris was able to look down at the face of the corpse outside the chamber doorway and recognized the sharply etched figures and recognized the sharply etched features of Vogel. Her capacity for surprise was exhausted. She stepped over the body and out into the trench. Looking up past the hole's crumbling rim, she could discern the luminous scars of the spinners' trails, heading to the west, toward Los Angeles. They did a good job, thought Iris, as she walked across the bare sand of the compound. Very thorough. She appreciated their work on a coldly craftsman-like basis. The area around the low buildings and rusted earth-moving equipment was littered with the bodies of the committee's operatives, most with their own automatic weapons inches away from their outflung hands. The peacefulness of dead things, their agendas terminated, lay over the star-illuminated patch of desert like a benediction. She found her guard, the one who had given her both water and her gun, face down outside the main building. Stepping around him, Iris pushed the door of the building open. No lights. The raiders, whoever they had been, had apparently taken out the chugging generator on which the compound had been running. She had already taken a flashlight off one of the corpses outside. She switched it on and sent its beam across the building's interior. Thorough, all right. This time, disgust tinged her estimation as she saw the dead owls scattered across the building's floor. Their feathers rattled with blood, looking like unfortunate stuffed toys that had been dragged through the machinery of some slaughterhouse. She turned away and walked back outside. A shadow, a moment darker than the blue night, passed across her. Iris looked up and saw tiny sections of starlight blinked out as something flew above. Something much smaller than a spinner that moved in silence and swooping curves, thrust by the beat of its widespread wings. She swept the beam of the flashlight up into the night sky and caught for a fraction of a second the reflected glow of two golden eyes. That was all it took for her to recognize the owl, the same one she had hunted and captured before. The owl flew out into the open expanse of the desert, toward the jagged shapes of the far hills. Her own eyes had become so adjusted to the partial spectrum laid down by the stars that she could follow the creature's rapid shadow across the flat landscape. In the distance, beyond a broken, flattened section of the fence ringing the compound, she saw the owl dart down toward the ground. The figure of a man, barely discernible, stood waiting for it, one forearm raised. The owl's wings flared outward to break its plummet, its talons reaching for and catching upon the perch of the man's arm. Once settled there, the owl wrapped its wings close against itself. As Iris watched, the man started walking across the luminous sands toward her. The owl remained on his raised arm when the dark figure had approached only a few yards closer. Iris realized that there was someone else with him, a smaller figure walking at his side, a child. Both figures, separate now in her gaze, strode unhurriedly toward her. When they reached the toppled section of fence, the man had to stretch his free hand toward the child and help her across. Iris could see that it was a girl, with dark hair drawn back into a single braid. With the gun dangling loose in her hand, Iris waited as they crossed the interior of the compound, past the inert machinery and the corpses face down in the sand. "You won't need that," said the man. "The gun. It's not necessary." The bright gold eyes of the owl regarded her without blinking. From where the owl perched on his raised arm, its eyes were at the same level as his. Eyes and a face that Iris had recognized, even before he spoke. "You're Deckard." A statement, not a question. "The Blade Runner." "Sure." He didn't even have to nod to let her know she was right. "You should know. You saw the movie." Deckard looked older than he had in the movie. The close cropped hair, flecked with wiry gray stubble at his temples. His face, with a tiny scar in the chin, was creased and weathered, but definitely the one that the female replicant in the movie had fallen in love with. He and the girl had stopped a yard or so away from her. The gaze of the dark-haired girl was nearly as unblinking as that of the owl. She still held on to Deckard's hand. "And my name," she announced in a quiet voice, "is Rachel." Of course. Iris didn't know what else to say. Of course it is. What she couldn't say, but knew in her heart with absolute certainty, was that she was looking at the child that the woman in the movie, the one also named Rachel, had once been. There was no mistaking the resemblance between the child and the adult. Or Iris also had realized between the child and herself. "You've come a long way," said Deckard, "farther than you realize. But in some ways," the same lopsided, ironic smile from the movie showed on his face, "you haven't gone anywhere at all." "I don't know what you mean." Fatigue had washed across her again, like some invisible tide across the desert, the surge of its waves bearing her on the surface without will of her own. "Really, I don't." "You will. Everything gets revealed, eventually, whether you want it to or not." Deckard let go of the child's hand and took hers. "Come on." "Wait a minute." Iris resisted the pull of his hand. "You were the one, weren't you? You had to have been." "What do you mean?" "The one who took the owl from me," said Iris. "When I had it in my apartment, I can tell. When you're standing this close to me, I can tell." Deckard waited a moment before replying. "It was necessary," he said finally, "and it was for your sake as well. If I hadn't taken the owl from you..." He glanced at the golden-eyed creature perched on his raised arm, then back to Iris. "You wouldn't be alive right now." "Maybe not." She couldn't decide whether that would have been better. She let the Blade Runner and the child lead her across the compound toward the fence. In the distance, out where the owl's shadow had led her gaze, she saw now an unmarked spinner parked in the hollow of one of the dunes. Where are we going? After all that had happened, Iris knew she had no way of stopping anything else from overtaking her. "Back to Los Angeles?" "Don't be silly," said the little girl, trudging beside Iris. "How could we? It's not possible." "Why not?" Deckard kept walking, leading her toward the spinner. He had let the owl fly ahead, the beat of its great wings audible in the desert silence. He glanced over at Iris. "You can't go back to L.A. Not the real L.A., if you've never been there in the first place." "What do you mean?" Iris stopped in her tracks, pulling her hand away from his side. She had tucked the gun inside her tattered jacket, its weight against her ribs. "What are you talking about?" "She doesn't know," said the girl Rachel. "You have to tell her everything." "Soon enough," said Deckard. He raised his hand, pointing up to the night sky. "Look. Take a good look. Those aren't the stars you see from Earth." Iris tilted her head, gazing up at the disordered constellations, none of which she recognized. In the farther corners of her memory were the bright images of other stars, other wordless patterns that she had never put a name to. "But maybe I never saw them," thought Iris. There had always been the clouds and the rains in L.A., and some L.A. "That doesn't prove anything," said Iris. She could hear the desperation in her voice, the attempt to hold on to at least one thing she had thought was true. "It doesn't." "Nothing does." Deckard started walking again with the little girl beside him. He didn't look back. "Then you find out for yourself." Iris waited a moment, feeling the desert winds slide through her jacket and across her skin. She glanced up at the unfamiliar stars once more, then lowered her gaze and followed after the man and the girl toward the waiting spinner. The end. Good night, baby Elias.